Hi, I'm Laura Cox Kaplan. Welcome to She Said podcast. Here on this podcast, we talk about the building blocks and the micro habits that help us create real and lasting influence. What do I mean by that? Well, we're talking about the kind of influence that helps you achieve your goals and whatever it is in life that you want to accomplish. But perhaps most importantly, it's the type of influence that helps you create real impact and that enables you to truly thrive. Hey friend, welcome to episode 289 of She Said podcast. I have such a special conversation and show for you today. I am really excited for us to dive in. But to set the stage for at least one of the topics that we're going to talk about, let me ask you this question. Have you ever found yourself just slogging through so much difficulty in your life or in a business or with a project? Maybe you're working as part of a team and you say to yourself, okay, is this worth it? Is this difficulty or this, the challenges that we're facing, are they worth it? Or should I be pivoting? And do you have a process for making that decision? And what does that look like in your life? Okay, that is one of several topics, as I said, that we're going to talk about with today's guest. Her name is Kendra Bracken Ferguson. She is the author of a fabulous new book called The Beauty of Success: Start, Grow, and Accelerate Your Brand. She is also a podcaster of the very popular Business of the Beat podcast. She is an internationally acclaimed thought leader. She's a founder 3 times over, a venture capitalist, and the CEO of a company called Brain Trust. She is also one of the first 200 Black women to raise more than $1 million in investment for her debut company. She has served really high-profile clients ranging from Halle Berry to Drew Barrymore to Gabrielle Union to Under Armour, L'Oreal, and many, many more. Kendra and I had so much fun in this conversation, and we really connected on so many themes. But this topic of how do you know when hard is too hard or difficult is too difficult is one of the ones that really resonated with me, and I think it will you as well. We also talk about the challenges associated with navigating comparison. And Kendra says something that I found really funny related to research and how you can sometimes fall into the trap of justifying your comparing yourself to others by saying that it's research. Anyway, I'm not going to take any more away from the conversation. I'm excited for you to hear it. And I'm excited to hear your feedback and to hear from you how you navigate some of these challenging situations. So this conversation with Kendra is part of our She Said podcast, the Southern Sea collaboration series. If you missed any of my previous guests as part of this series, please go back and listen. They are truly, truly phenomenal. Without delay, here is Kendra Bracken Ferguson. Enjoy. Kendra, welcome to She Said.
Hi, Laura. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I am so happy to have you for so many reasons. Number one, you and I grew up not too far from each other, probably years apart. But you grew up at least early on in Abilene, Texas, which is about 60 miles west of my hometown, which is called Rising Star. People have probably heard of Abilene. No one other than my friends from Rising Star have heard of Rising Star, but that connects us in this really fun and interesting way, which I love. And I'm delighted that you're here as part of our She Said podcast, Southern Sea collaboration series. So thank you for making the time to do that. And most importantly, you have an amazing story and journey to share with my listeners. So thank you for all those reasons.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be so much fun. And it's so funny because people that know that Texas is filled with these amazing little towns that no one's ever heard of. And so it's fantastic that we have that connection. I love that.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, you are on a book tour currently. You're doing all of your normal, day-to-day work. You're a mom of two. You've got a lot of things on your plate. So I thought what we would do is start by talking about Brain Trust, which is your business currently. Explain to listeners what that is and maybe a little bit about how that got started.
Well, it's so funny because one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you was just how you defined the podcast. And I think that it's really fascinating when we think about influence and the sphere of influence that she said actually uncovers. And so it actually is a great connection into brain trust because my career has been just so fascinating and it's been great to kind of look back at the journey and everything that I learned.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I started my career in PR and I was really one of those people that knew I wanted to do PR. And that's a different level of influence when you think about PR. We get to write the words and the stories and the narratives for our brands, and we're influencing anyone who comes in contact with that brand that we're representing. And then I moved from my career in PR at Fleishman Hillard to Ralph Lauren. I was the first director of digital media there. So again, had this different understanding of influence when it came to, this beautiful brand that was, run by this amazing, brilliant family and launching their first influencer campaigns and launching them on social. And it was there that I met my first business partner, Karen Rabinovitz, and we created a company called Digital Brand Architects back in 2010, which was actually one of the first agencies to manage bloggers as talent. And so I
Interesting.
was squarely in this interesting world of influence, which was bloggers back then.
Uh-huh.
And creating something that people really weren't looking at when we thought about who's actually influencing everything that consumers are buying and consuming. And, back in 2010, there was no Pinterest, Instagram was barely there. And so it was this new way of thinking. But it was through that experience launching that company and really building what influencers would become, where we are nowadays. I ended up with this interesting moment, right? As entrepreneurs, as founders, as women, as executives, there's this moment where you're kind of like, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And is there something else I should be doing? And so, having built this really successful career, I was sitting in my office and I was like, what have I learned? And it was that I love working with smart people. And I also only want to work with people that I trust, which was something that in my first company I underestimated. And, I became part of the first group of 100 Black women to raise more than $1 million for my company. So I was thrust into an interesting world of influence and what that would be. So when I was sitting in my office, I was like, smart people, people I trust, brain trust. And I knew that I wanted to get back from managing talent as influencers into really back to my love of brand strategy and brand marketing and brand development. And so Brain Trust was really created as this consultancy to help brands grow their businesses, to build community. And every program that we did had some form of influencer marketing or influencer activation.
Uh-huh.
That was really the first iteration of Brain Trust in 2015.
That is fantastic. Absolutely fascinating. Now, I know you're doing a lot of impact investing currently, or really venture capital investing is probably a better way to say it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead.
So maybe talk a little bit about the evolution of the business from that standpoint, because I was especially interested to read in your book, and I heard you speak at the Southern Sea as well. But I was interested to read in your book that the consultancy piece only takes you so far, right? And maybe recognizing that opportunity to really build on that in a space that you didn't have as much experience in, and maybe dealing with I mean, we use the term imposter syndrome maybe more than we should, but the reality is like that was an area where you didn't have as much experience. Maybe talk about overcoming that and how you jumped into that space.
Absolutely. So, Laura, it's so fascinating because as I'm building brain trust and growing it and scaling it and actually selling it and buying it back, I went through this interesting moment in 2020, which we all did. But in 2020, as I was trying to save my business, I had so many of my founder friends who were calling. And they were like, what do we do? How do we keep our businesses? Do you have any ideas? Because I was always kind of the go to idea generator. And so I remember sitting there and thinking, this is so much bigger than me. Like, there is no way that I can talk to everybody, help everybody. And, I know deep down that my superpower is really to be a connector. It's to be of service. Like that is what I've been blessed with. And so I was like, how do I solve for this? Because I'm also a solver. And so I called a few of my founder friends and I said, you know what? I want to take what brain trust is meant to be, smart people coming together to solve problems, and turn it into Brain Trust Founder Studio.
Mm.
And so in 2021 of October, still running Brain Trust, the marketing agency, we launched Brain Trust Founder Studio, really with this model of kind of leave no founder behind. And
Mhm.
so we have a start tier pre-revenue, a grow tier 10,000 to a million, and our accelerate tier is a million or more. And we provide programming and community and mentorship and education and events, all under the guise of how do we help founders start, grow, and accelerate their businesses. And so as we were doing it and having and seeing so much impact, sometimes you just need someone to bounce things off of. You need someone to say, oh, you need marketing, you need growth hacking, you need to understand manufacturing. Here's 5 people, call them today, versus I'm going to take 3 weeks to find the people. So as we were doing that, I also understood this notion of capital. And I've experienced it as a Black human, as a woman, as an entrepreneur. To your point, as someone who didn't come from Goldman Sachs, I have a master's in business, but I'm a comms PR major, and really trying to figure out how do we unleash this pillar of capital?
Mhm.
If we know that women receive less capital and the percentages are getting less, how can I not only have a studio and a platform to help and be of service, but we know that all businesses at some point will need some form of capital.
Mhm.
And I always think about human capital, social capital, and then just the gritty financial capital. And so I remember going to different people and saying, I want to build a venture fund, I want to invest. And people saying, stay in your lane. That's not really for you. And then it's fascinating. Your biggest supporters think that they're truth tellers.
Mm.
And sometimes we have to overlook the truth that other people put on us because we know what our own truth is and we know what we're capable of that others may not. And a lot of time people will inadvertently squash our dreams out of protection for what they think we need.
Mhm.
And so I always thought about that as I was moving. And funny enough, my one of our good friends was having a 50th birthday party in Cabo. And I got the invitation. I said to my husband, we have to go. And he's like, do we even know these people? Like, why are we going to Cabo? And when we got there, we were walking into the event. The first person I saw was this woman, Lisa Stone. And she's like, Kendra. And I'm like, Lisa, we hadn't seen each other in so long. And she said to me, she said, I've been following your journey and I really want to like help you. She's like,
Mm.
how can I help? And the funny thing about Lisa is that we had known each other for 20 years. She's about 6, 8 years, 10 years older than me. She started a company called Blog Her, which she later sold to Pinsky Media. And I was at the first Blog Her, loved everything that she built. And I remember she introduced me to a woman who was raising $100 million fund, Sally Krawcheck. And she took me to this dinner and she was like, Kendra, you need to be in this room. You need to know people. Now, this, Laura, was like, I mean, 10 years before I even started the studio or this fund.
Wow. It's planting those seeds though, right?
Seeds. She was already walking me into these different rooms of influence that would then help me build this next path or bridge to my journey. So this weekend we're in Cabo and she's like, tell me everything. And I'm telling her what I was doing. And she said, I've been really trying to pivot back into my passion. And in 2015, I remember Lisa had written Black Lives Matter on her LinkedIn page. So this is
Mhm.
long before we had Black Lives Matter and COVID. And so it speaks to her true authenticity of wanting to help underrepresented communities.
Yeah.
So that really, we spent the weekend and she architected what a fund could look like. She never said, I don't think you can do this. You don't have the right experience. It was like, let's use our experience of picking the hits, picking the influencers, picking the winners, and let's translate that into venture. And the beauty of us building our brain trust together was that not only had she had an exit from her company, a rather large exit, she also had raised 100 million with one fund and 125 million with another fund. And so when we coupled our skill sets together, we were like, we have Brain Trust Fund. And we went on to raise 15 million for that first fund. We're getting ready to launch fund two, and really expanding the reach of the different founders that we're able to invest in.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is so amazing. Okay, I have so many questions. Let's start with, it strikes me that your reconnection with Lisa was a very fortuitous moment for you. If you had not had that moment and thinking about all of those trusted advisors, those mentors who were steering you in a different direction that you knew in your gut probably wasn't right for you, what's your advice for someone to know how to listen to your gut, how to say to your mentors, to those trusted advisors, to the people who love you and want the best for you, but may or may not actually know what that is as well as you do? How do you navigate that? What's your advice for people?
So I look at it really in two ways. And I also from a place of deep spirituality and a deep belief in God and a higher being.
Mm,
And so I very much have prayed and I really believe in discernment and understanding like
mm,
what's for me is for me. And it is really hard, to your point, when people are coming at you and they're trying to rock you off your boat. And what I always pray for is like, God put a hedge of protection around me so that only the right things are coming for me. And then I can also keep my eyes open and be aware of things that may not be for me. And one of the things that was so exciting and I think just really profound when I was writing my new book, The Beauty of Success, Start, Grow, and Accelerate Your Brand, was that I had this moment of looking back at the journey and all the steps and all the pieces and all of the moments where people said, you can't do this, you shouldn't do that. And how through my awareness and what I like to call self actualization through
mhm,
prayer, something always countered it.
mm.
And so the middle was making sure that I was aware so that I could pick up on it. And so
Interesting.
even in my book, I have a chapter, Claim Your Non-Negotiables. And I always start with like, what are the pillars of which I believe? Community, mentorship, education, and capital. And I've had to claim my non negotiables around those different areas, things that I'm not going to let others take away from me, or things that I'm not going to kind of bow down to or not let happen. And so I've spent a lot of time. I have an amazing executive coach, Julie Flanders, and we spend a lot of time looking at the pillars, looking at the non negotiables, writing everything down so that in these moments where I'm faced with, okay, someone told you that you can't start a fund to do what you know, but if you look at everything along the way,
Mhm,
everything is pointing to you actually can build a fund. And if I go back to Brain Trust, the significance of me naming my company Brain Trust, I didn't even realize it back then, but I only want to work in community. I don't think that we as humans should be doing anything by ourselves if we want to create larger outcomes. So there's things, of course, that we do by ourselves, but I think when you really think about where do you want your business to go? Who do you want to be? How do you want to grow your company? What do you want your life to look like? It always involves somebody else along the way helping you get there.
yeah.
And so I never stopped believing. There were times when I was like, can I do this? Or what's the pivot? At one point, Laura, I was like, I'm going to invest off of my balance sheet. And I was having all these meetings with different people. How do you invest off of your balance sheet? And nothing quite fit.
Mm.
And I remember somebody told me when I sold my company to CAA, which I kind of mentioned, but we'll use that for another She Said podcast. But I remember learning from the other agents that if a deal gets too hard, that means it's not meant to be.
Mm.
And sometimes we make things so hard. We fight tooth to nail when it doesn't feel right, but we can't get outside of our own head
Mhm.
to realize that we need to let that go and we need to go on a different path.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking and thinking. And so I knew it. I couldn't tell my husband why we were going to Cabo, but I said, trust me, there is a reason that God wants us to be here. I've been praying and praying, and I can visualize myself being there. I didn't see Lisa because we don't always know the how,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But as soon as she walked up and said, I've been following and I've been trying to get to my passion, I was like, this is it. And I remember saying a prayer, like, God, if this is meant to be, continue to make this be easy and let it flow. And so I think we have to figure out whether you believe in God or a higher power, you have to figure out who you are, what you believe, what you'll stand for, what you can see in your life. And then you have to be open so that whenever those pieces come, and they come in all forms, that you don't overlook it and you miss this path that's going to take you to where you have to go. And it takes mental fortitude. This is not like, but it's not an easy thing. Laura, I literally, whenever I was getting the opportunity to do my podcast, I remember being like, I can't do a podcast. Like, I don't know. And I signed a deal for 1 year. I said to my network, I was like, I'm only going to sign for 1 year. And they were like, we'd really like you to sign for two. I said, no, I'm only doing one. I'm now in season 4, 4 years later, 170 episodes, and I love it. And
Yeah.
it was the podcast that led to my book because my publisher was listening to my podcast and said, you should do a book based upon all of these insights.
Yeah.
And so all these nuggets of things that connected themselves to help me be able to, when it gets hard, keep going.
Yeah, yeah. I love all of that. And I'm so glad that you tackled that issue of when you run into that brick wall, because I think it's so hard to know whether it's difficulty that you're supposed to keep plowing through, because it's not like life is supposed to be easy, right? And whether you're a person of faith or not a person of faith, I'm also a person of faith, and I agree with you, but at the same time, I know that life's not supposed to be easy, that there are supposed to be struggles, but there's a question in my mind sometimes about knowing when is enough enough? Like, when is it the struggle you're supposed to be having that's going to lead you, in your case, to the Lisa, right? And this moment where you knew when you saw her, there was this connection point because you had been going through this struggle, right? And so being able to navigate that and knowing that that struggle is the right struggle to have, I think is part of the challenge. What do you think about that?
I agree with you, and I'm so glad you brought that up. Um, I don't think that we're not sitting here like in rainbows and everything is great and like, you know what I'm saying? Like it does get to be great, and that's where we have to find our own happiness. We have to find happiness in every single moment,
Right.
and we have to be the arbiters of that. So I remember I was sitting in my office and I was just like, this is so hard. I was like, I can't do it because I need a this staff and a that staff, and we weren't in an office, and I was like, I can't do it. And I remember going to church and my pastor saying, like, you have all the tools that you need. God's giving you all the tools that you need. And I had to reframe it.
Hmm.
And I remember sitting there being like, I have all the tools that I need. I have an amazing, Laura, you and I can say Rolodex because we're of a certain age. I had an amazing Rolodex of people. Like my team is ride or die. Like, I really try not to talk to them. My assistant was saying something about this new rule in California that they're passing. And I was like, I don't want to talk to y'all on the weekend. You guys actually call me on the weekend. You're texting me. But I was thinking, like, my team is so dedicated. They're so passionate. Like, I was like, I have this great team. I have this Rolodex. The things that I'm trying to solve for, it's not about me hiring 5 other people. That would be great. But how am I using the people and the connections that I have now to get me through this hurdle.
Mhm.
And I don't think that anything in life is just going to be super easy. We love our children. That doesn't mean that being a parent is easy. We love our spouse or our partner or our best friend. But even then, there's always going to be moments that we have to overcome. And I think to your point, the question becomes, how do we know when it's gone so far that that pain, that suffering isn't actually taking us to the next place?
Yeah.
And I use this example of my agency. I started my agency, as I shared, in 2015.
Mm.
I love the agency. I love meeting clients. I love the art of it. And I had built the agency, multi millions. We sold. I bought it back. I lost millions. I had to redo it. And I've carried it with me because I bought it back and I did all these things. And then literally I was sitting last year and I was like, and where am I at now?
Mm.
It stresses me out. I have maxed out credit cards. I've taken out loans trying to keep this agency. When I took a step and I looked at our studio was flourishing. We have the largest membership based platform for diverse founders, hands down. We had this
Amazing.
amazing fund that people said I couldn't do. And now we're getting ready to go raise $100 million fund. And so I'm sitting there looking at it and I was like, but you're making it so hard. And when I thought about where does the stress come? Where does it impact my relationships? Where am I constantly like, I need this, I need this? And it was sitting at the agency.
Mm.
And so I realized like I had to make a sacrifice and I had to pivot what the agency was. And even in my book, The Beauty of Success, chapter 3, know when to pivot to survive and thrive. And I said, okay, this has gone on long enough. I have to do something really difficult and I have to shut what the construct of this agency was because now I see it. These other things are thriving so that I can move. And I remember, and I talk about this even in the book, like I was at this red light one time and it was so painful and I was crying and it was hard and and I was like, but God wouldn't bring you here to fail. And so let go of the things. Don't be afraid to let go of the things that are not working because you've done every single thing. And if you can look out and see something better happening on the other side, then you have to make it
Yeah.
happen. And that's the reality of life.
I mean, just so much in my head. I don't even know what to ask you next. I think one of the things that keeps running through my mind, you were 100% right about all of that. It is such what you said was so powerful. Um, Sometimes I think the challenge can be looking around at the people who are next to you, who are in vertical paths, who are in
Mhm.
similar industries, and you say to yourself, okay, if she's doing that, then maybe I should be doing that. Or if she can do that, maybe I should do that. Whatever it is, but this idea of comparing yourself to other people and to their version of success as opposed to defining that on your own. Maybe talk a little bit about navigating that particular and very specific piece, because I think I'm a big fan of social media. I use it, I try to use it really responsibly. At the same time, it does perpetuate certain tendencies toward comparison because we are human and that's what people do. So maybe give us some perspective on how to navigate the tendency toward comparing ourselves to others in business.
Laura, I love it. You're like, because we are human. So at the end of the day, we have to give ourselves some grace because we are human. And this is one that I really try to keep tabs on. And I feel like I have been mastering
Mm.
it to a really interesting depth recently. And it comes in many different ways. And I think it goes back to self actualization and how we support ourselves and continue to make sure that we believe that we are the best version of ourselves that we can be by surrounding us with the things that make us be that. So, such an example, and it's so funny because I was actually at church last night and one of the songs was just about victory and how God has given each of us our own victory and our own opportunity for greatness, right? And each of us has our own path and the thing that's going to make us be great and happy and feel accomplished. And I have been so focused on that because I have this new book. So I remember book is coming out and we're talking about bestseller lists, we're talking about all these things, and literally two people in my circle, different concepts, but similar books, had books come out. Another one of them had already had a bestseller list. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, how is this going to go? And I went, we were working on my book tour, and I went and I'm looking at like my peers' book tours. And I'm like, they did this and they did that. And how are we going to do that? And I remember it was all about, well, what are you bringing to the table? And clearly you have a book. And I had to stop looking because I started, and this is what we say to ourselves. I started looking, so I was like, I need an example. I need an example of people who have done this. So I'm going to go look at everybody else. And then I'm going to try and figure out what I'm going to do. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, like one of my friends was like, oh yes, hire this company. And it was $40,000. I was like, you spent 40,000. I was like, yes, no, that's not what I'm doing. And I have been so like focused more than I ever have before. And so I have taken great care because I've been working in social for so long. I have taken great care to not fall trap to what people are putting out there because I experience it with myself. Like I'm doing great things with my family and my children and all of these. And unless I want to, you don't see it. But what you are seeing is that I'm on this book tour and I'm going from city to city. I'm flying out again today. I'm going to post something from the plane again because that's part of my branding. That's what I've architected.
Right.
That's
Right.
and we know that because we're marketers. And so I always take it with a grain of salt. And so I've made it a mission to say, you're building your business this way. You're building, that's how it's going to go. But this book brought on a different level of ego and what has become
Mm.
humility that I really had to grapple with. And I had to take a step back and say how they're doing their tour is how they're doing their tour. And I lost a little bit of time because I was so caught up. And once I took a second and I said, okay, let's go into your toolkit.
Mhm.
So, you know, Veronica Beard, you work with the Kendra Scott team. And I remember thinking, like, my tour is so different because I'm in beauty and wellness and I'm in fashion. And I started my career in New York and I called, you know, I'm emailing the Veronicas, like, I'm doing this book tour. And it was like, great, we'll be your clothing partner, host your events in our store, and we're going to give 20% to Brain Trust Founders Studio. Called the team at Kendra Scott. They designed my success necklace and we're doing events there. And that was so different than other
Right.
authors because that was personal to me. That was part of my story. And I had to really look at what are all the different opportunities. I went to Purdue. Purdue brought me in a Delphi women's conference. I was like, oh my gosh, I love educating. And so I had to navigate it differently.
Mhm.
And I had to catch myself because under this guise of research was really this compare and contrast of what it was going to be. And they ended up having a great tour. I've had a great tour. We were number one new release in business entrepreneurship in Amazon. And I said, that's so fascinating because I do so much work in this space of founders and entrepreneurs and tapping into my own network. And so I'm constantly, there's the noise of we want to make sure that we know what other people are doing so that we can one praise them. I always try now, even when it's coming into my mind and I see somebody winning a deal or getting something, I stop and I say, you know what, let me give thanks to them, let me congratulate and salute them. That doesn't mean that I don't feel it, but I catch myself because in order for me to have my blessings and in order for me to grow and build my brand and to hit the list that I need to hit and to be in the places where I need to go, I have to stay focused on what makes me
Mhm.
important, valuable, and unique. And I have to remind myself. And this goes back to journaling. Like I make sure as I'm going into different things, what do you bring to the table? What does your network look like? Who are the people that want to help you? What is your brain trust?
Mhm.
I live and breathe by brain trust because I believe that our brain trust are the people that will help keep us centered and grounded when we're trying to do all these other things. And we have to tap into that center so that we stay on our course. It's Laura, it's exactly what you said. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen because we're human, but we have to figure out what are our triggers to get us back to who we need to be. And that may be getting off of social media. It may be calling someone. It may be writing down all of the great successes and things that you've done in the last 5 days so that you know that's your path and your journey. And that's what's going to move you forward because we can't live someone else's lives. No matter what we do, we can't live their lives. And so we're not going to have the same blessings and the gifts that they have because it's just not possible. So the sooner we can get out of that and into our own reality, the sooner we can focus on the things that are going to be good for us and meant for us.
Yeah. Oh, so,
Yeah.
so right. So right. That was so great. Um, I want to make sure that we talk about, I mean, there's so many things that we're not going to have a chance to get to. You are busy on this book tour, and I've got to let you go in about 10 minutes. But I'd love for you to talk about one of the concepts in the book that I thought was particularly unique is you make a real distinction between entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship and the role that both of those concepts have played throughout your career. Maybe describe and sort of break that down for us so that people understand what you mean by that.
Thank you, Laura, because I think that this is so important. So, chapter one in the beauty of success is, are you an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur? And I had to start there because my whole career was really, it started from this notion of I wanted to climb the corporate ladder. So when I was, my mom is always like, when you were in pre-K, you were like, when do I get to go to kindergarten? When I was in elementary school, I was so concerned about middle school concerned about high school. When I was in college, I was in every club. I was like, I can only be the president of my sorority because it's going to look good on my resume. I was a gold duster. Like, I had 4 internships, like, on campus. I was the senior editor of the newsletter. I worked at the mall. Like, everything in my mind was like, I want to have this, like, bomb corporate job. And I remember, like, getting the opportunity. And Laura, part of that was, even when I wanted my internship, I was like, I'm only going to apply to the top 5 PR agencies in the world because this is my corporate structure. And I applied. I ended up getting my internship at Fleishman Hillard. They were at the time the largest PR agency in the world. They offered me a job after school. I ended up moving to New York. It was a whole journey. And it was so exciting because I was like, this is what I always wanted. And at that time, when you'd go into these big agencies, you'd have a class of like 24, 30 people who were all assistant account executives. And I remember I would sign up for everything. I worked on like 6 to 8 accounts at a time. It was like, who wants to volunteer? I remember canceling trips with my girlfriends because I was on this path. And what I later realized is that I was just so focused on building and building. And one of the things, even before I had children, I remember signing up for the moms group to help build the moms group. And I was like, I can help y'all. And I helped build the digital practice group. And it was all of these different things that I was doing my job, but I was
Mhm.
building inside of the company. And I was building because I loved it. But as time and faith would have it, I was building my
Mm.
way towards becoming an entrepreneur. And I truly believe that my journey to being an entrepreneur was because I was in corporate. I know how to navigate a mailroom. I understood how to, manage up, as they say. Like, I learned how to write a review. I was trained by some of the best in the art of pitching and media relations. And so I also had the opportunity to build internally. And so when I made this leap to being an entrepreneur, I was like, oh, goodness gracious, there is a difference in building something under
Right.
the guise of a corporate structure. You may get in trouble, you may not get a promotion if it doesn't work, but you're not responsible for payroll. People are going to get paid
Mhm.
regardless because that's the role of the company unless something else happens. But you have different tools, you have different resources, you have people that you can lean on, you have HR that can help you navigate, you have legal. Whenever you're an entrepreneur, as we're on our own. We're our own HR, we're our own legal, we're bootstrapping many of us until we can get to a place where
Mhm.
we can bring those different things on. So what I realized in taking, the Myers-Briggs and these CI tests was that even my personality shifted and altered a little bit when I was an entrepreneur working inside of a company building than the true expression of myself, test after test after
Mm.
test, when I was an entrepreneur. And when you're an entrepreneur, the risks are so much different because you truly are. You're responsible for everybody because you don't have the back of the corporate. And so I always say we need both. Like, entrepreneurs are not better than entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are not better than entrepreneurs. Our society, our economy, we need both of us working together. And I always credit, I was just doing a podcast on my podcast, Business of the Beat, with Amanda Young, who runs philanthropy at Kendra Scott. They're one of our partners. And I said to her, I said, the reason that we're even sitting here, The reason that you guys are supporting all of our founders is because you're an entrepreneur in your company and you realize that Kendra Scott is such a phenomenal brand with a phenomenal founder, and that you wanted to give back to local communities who didn't have the opportunity that you guys have being this big billion-dollar business. And so I said my success has been rooted in the fact that I have entrepreneurs that I can go to who can help the entrepreneurs along the way. And so I think that it's this beautiful marriage of both, but you as a person have to understand, where do you want to sit and where do you want to be? And I say to my friends, one of my friends just left a big corporate job. And I said to her, I said, I love you long time and you can build things internally, but this world of entrepreneurship and the expense account is different, the resources are different. You don't get a chief of staff and assistant into this when you first start out. You have to build to it. And I said, I'm just not sure that you're cut out for it. And she was like, thank you. And I said, but I will support you if that's what you want to do. So she went on her entrepreneur
Mm.
journey, and 6 months later she came back and she was like, thank you for being honest. She said, I'm actually getting ready to go back in house so that I can build the things that I want to build, but I know where I'm better. And she said, and I got the chance to be an entrepreneur and I'm better as an entrepreneur. And so that's why I started that way, with like, just figure it out. And for me, I was an entrepreneur. Then I started my company, became an entrepreneur. I sold it, went back to being an entrepreneur, and then was like, all right, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not doing that again.
I'd love for you to talk about too, because we've mentioned the book, we've talked about different passages in the book, but I'd love for you to talk just quickly about, you've got a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of things on your plate. Why did you feel the need to write a book? Why was it important to you? Is that a piece of your platform and your business, or sort of what was the mindset behind the need for that product? Because I think sometimes, lots of people, maybe everybody has a book, right? But finding the time and making the decision about whether to write it, and finding sort of the white space that enables you to tell maybe a different story or have a different take on it, can be, it can be hard to make that decision, but the time is probably the biggest part of it, right? So maybe talk us through why the book, why was that important to you?
Oh, Laura, the time is such a, for a lot of us who run businesses or senior leaders, and we set out to write these books, we don't necessarily get to take the sabbatical and go off to Maine and sit by the ocean and write. Time is the biggest thing. I was like, I got to run my company. I need to take my daughter to school. My husband's talking to me. I have a whole company to run. I will say this, because we have, and I say we, my team and I really use them as a grounding perspective because I'm a visionary leader. And so at any given moment, I own so many domains, Laura. I come up with so many ideas and I meet so many people and I'm off to the races with the new thing. And I really have to stay grounded. And so I actually have a brand map for myself. It's brand KBF.
Uh-huh.
And it starts with community, mentorship, education, and capital. Everything that I do, I ladder back into the pillars, including my friends and my family, because it all has to work together. And as we know that there's no such thing as balance, there is never a day where everything is a quarter here and a quarter there and everything just rolls. It doesn't happen that way.
Right.
And so at any given moment, one thing is going to take precedence over the other. So I literally worked and we created this will so that everything fits. So Brain Trust Founders Studio fits under my pillar of building a community. It fits under my pillar of
Mm.
mentorship. Brain Trust Agency fits under our pillar of education, educating brands on how to do something. My podcast, Business of the Beat, fits under mentorship, education, community. Brain Trust Fund fits under capital. So everything actually ladders back up. And because I'm also a literal thinker, Brain Trust Agency, Brain Trust Founder Studio, Brain Trust Fund. And then when we started thinking about the podcast, beat has a very cultural connotation. In culture, when you talk about the beat, it's like beating your face, meaning that you have a full face of makeup and you look really great. And I'm about the back end of that, which is business.
Uh-huh.
And everything I do, helping the founders, the fund ties into business, and we only invest in beauty and wellness. And so there were all these subtleties that really made everything in my ecosystem fit so that I can I'll use easily with air quotes, but so that I can navigate through them all and they all have a connecting piece.
Uh-huh.
When it came to the book, and my mom will always say, and you've met my mom says, like, oh my gosh, when you were in high school, you were like, I'm going to write a book. And my mom always said to me, get a job, make some money, experience some things, and then you can write your
Right.
book. My publisher was listening to my podcast and literally sent me an email and said, hey, I've been listening to your podcast. We think this would make a great book. Now, Laura, here's the funny thing. And this is what I say when we write things down and we think about all the steps on our journey. 5 years ago, I was with a friend in New York at the Empire State Building. And when I sold my company into CAA GBG, our New York team moved into their offices in Empire State Building. And so I'm sitting there, I'm meeting one of my friends who was also an editor who had decided to leave to become an entrepreneur and was starting an agency so that she could represent books and authors. So she says to me, oh, you sold your company. Let's write a book. I'm like, great, send me the paperwork. I'm going to sign it with you. She sends me the agreement. I'm going to sign with her. And then she says, oh, this is too hard. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going back to being an editor. Sorry, I can't represent your book. So I was like, okay, got it.
Okay,
Not meant
thanks.
to be.
Thanks, but no thanks.
For no things, for the lawyers, for all the things. And it wasn't the right time.
Mm.
And so when my publisher sent me that email, I remember thinking, wow, 5 years ago, and look at what I've done now. And I went back into my pillars and I said to my publisher, I said, this only works if I can make sure that it ladders into community mentorship, education, and capital.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you read the preface of the book, I start with these are my pillars, and here's how it's woven throughout everything that I've done in my career. And then we took the podcast. So it started with here's everything that I've done. Here's my pillars. There was this note that my mom wrote me in 2018 that talked about, and you can see it in the book, that talked about, protecting my team, doing what's right, claiming my non negotiables, having a heart for God. I took that letter from 2018 and I put that as my table of contents because I knew that every chapter needed to ladder up into that letter,
Mm.
but also into my pillars. And then I said, okay, I'm a 3-time founder. I have a story, but my brand is called Brain Trust. So it's not ever just all about me, it's about the community that I'm building. And so I went through, and at that point, I had just over 100 podcasts, and we actually listed them in the book to make sure that everyone was represented. But I picked 16 podcasts and I wove them into each of the chapters of my own narrative.
Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about writing the book, because to your point, I'm building a studio, I'm running this, we're launching a fund. And I remember my assistant saying to me, in order to get this done, we've got to put blocks in your calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And so we put, and thanks to her, Taya, brilliant from Harvard. I was like, use that Harvard AI and brain to help me organize this. So she put together this calendar and it worked back from when it was due. And she put writing blocks. And I remember my publisher saying, like, do you need a ghostwriter? Like, how are you going to get this done? And I was like, that adage, like, give it to the busiest person in the room. I was like, I've got it. And I said, but I have to write it for myself because I know what I want to say. I know the podcast. I know how to weave it together.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys will clean it up from a publishing perspective. And so literally it was blocked out in my calendar. I figured out my episodes from the podcast. I matched everything to my business. I mean, even when you think about the title, The Beauty of Success, Start, Grow, and Accelerate Your Brand, as I shared early on, Brain Trust Founders Studio has 3 segments of founders: our start tier, our grow tier, and our accelerate tier.
Wow.
And so I very intentionally wove it so that it would fit into me being a working mom who runs her own business.
Mm-hmm.
And we made sure that it was, it was processed, it was set up so that I could find these opportunities to write. Because for me, I wanted to write it myself. I
Yeah.
wanted to pen to paper, have that voice.
Uh-huh.
And it was such a beautiful experience because I will say, at the end of the day, this is marketing. Like, I love the story. I wanted to make sure that there were journal prompts in there so you could follow along and you could fill in, because that's about education to me. If you're
Yeah.
going to take the time to read something, how are you educating yourself and how are you absorbing what you've learned to help you move your own business forward? And so it was just a blessing. Now, I will say this, my publisher's like, "Book 2," and I know what I wanna do, but Laura, I gotta tell you, I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna have that tenacity to write 250 something pages, which, when you write a book, it's actually longer because 'cause it's gotta be,
Absolutely. Well, my money is on you, friend. I have to say, Kendra. I mean, I've loved this conversation. You've touched on so many themes that resonate with me and touch my heart so deeply. And I know that will be true for listeners as well. So, on behalf of the Southern Sea and She Said podcast, thank you for spending some time with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
oh my gosh, Laura. Thank you. I'm so happy that we could do this. And it just makes me emotional as we end, because I said to Lydia Frenette, who introduced me to the Southern Sea,
Right. Me
I said,
too. Actually, yeah. Isn't that
Lydia,
funny?
she's the ambassador.
I know. She really is.
Oh, she's phenomenal. And I said to her, I said, Lydia, I said, you've written this book. I said, my publisher wants me to diversify. And, what do you think? And she said, come to the Southern Sea. And she introduced me to Sharon Whitney. And from the first moment, it was so warm and so receptive. And going to that conference, that was the first stop on my book tour, the
Oh,
first time I saw my book in real life.
oh,
And they
amazing.
made that opportunity an access point.
Yeah.
And so it's such full circle for you to include me on your show and for this to be part of the Southern Sea. And so thank you for seeing me and supporting me and my work and the book. And I just really appreciate you. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, I'm so delighted. Hey, friend, I'd love to know which aspects of this conversation resonated most with you. Do you take the time to sit down and really write down your core pillars? And do you use those core pillars when you're facing those difficulties and deciding, okay, is path A simply too difficult and is it time for a pivot? I'd love to know how you think about this and what you use to really help inform your decision making. Also, friend, just a quick reminder, this conversation is the latest episode in our She Said podcast, the Southern Sea collaboration series. If you've missed any of those conversations, I hope you'll go back and listen, because these women are truly, truly fantastic. So for now, though, friend, thanks for listening, and thanks for spending a little bit of time with me each week. I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you again next week. You take care.